We're gonna probably just get started, because, I don't know where everyone is, but we'll get started. And we are recording all this, so for anyone that missed it, we'll be able to get them the copies so they did not miss it. Little housekeeping before we go into our guest speaker. Our next meeting is May 10th. May 10th is our next meeting, so make sure that's on your calendar. It should be on your calendar for the year when I send out the invites. And we are still looking for a topic or guest speaker, so if anyone has any exciting ideas, let me know. We'll also remind you that we're still open to getting new members, so if anyone fits in our industry that you want to invite, please let me know, I'll add it to the list. And then finally, we also have a LinkedIn group specifically for this organization, so we'd love to make sure that you go there and use it, and post stuff, and it's a good way to interact. We're only meeting once every 2 months, so a great way to learn and grow from each other throughout the year through the LinkedIn group. Anyone have any questions, comments, or thoughts? All right, well, let me introduce our speaker. We've got Israel Duke here today, and Israel works for the state of Louisiana, and he works on designing user interfaces. Been doing it for over 10 years. The cool thing I love when I met with Israel is that he is doing some things in state government for the sites for the state that are awesome, that you don't think states do, like to think about what makes sense and doing things in a more uniform, which I love. He's my hero because he was on the original team that helped design the LA Wallet, which is one of my favorite apps out there. I just love what it does. So really excited because he's going to talk today about usability from a disability standpoint, but also from an everyday user standpoint. So really excited for Israel to speak to us. So Israel, welcome.
Well, thank y'all for coming. I'm Israel Duke, and as Warren said, a little bit about me. I've been designing interfaces for apps, websites, and mobile apps for over 10 years. Also, with housekeeping, I have my AirPods in because I'm recording, and they're acting as my microphone, so when I send out the slides and the video for later, I should sound more clearly than I would just using the microphone on my laptop. Also, many years ago, I used to work for Matt. Matt was my boss. So if I, pick at him a little bit today, that's because of that one time he wouldn't give me that Monday off. And yes. So what I'm going to talk about today, I've titled this Just-in-Time Usability. Those of you who are here, you have e-commerce websites. That means your business relies a lot on your website to bring in direct revenue, usually for people ordering parts, products, etc. But you may have heard over the last couple of years there is more of an interest in a broad term called usability, which is one thing I'm going to talk about, and a subpart of that called accessibility, which is making sure your website can be used by people with disabilities. And this is important because the federal government, particularly the Department of Justice, is paying a lot more attention to things such as disability lawsuits. You may have heard some time ago that Domino's Pizza was sued because a person couldn't use their website to order pizza. Domino's settled out of court, so we don't know exactly how much they've got, but it probably was not, a small amount. So what are you going to get from watching me today? You're going to get a bit more understanding of some of the concepts for usability and accessibility that I'm going to talk about. I'm also going to show you a demonstration of something called a screen reader, which is something that blind or visually impaired people use to access and use websites. And then after that, I will give you 10 things that you can look at yourself to check some basic guidelines for how your site is performing, and you can use these 10 things as a litmus test as to whether or not you need to engage with your developers further or a specialized firm that deals with accessibility evaluations, etc. But what is usability? In a broad sense, usability in the tech world is thought about how easy it is for your app or website or product to be used by as wide a group of people as possible. If it can be used by more people, you will make more sales. Accessibility is, as I said earlier, it's a smaller portion of usability in that it deals with people who have some sort of challenges such as vision, hearing, mobility, or cognitive challenges. So I'd like you to take a look at the photograph here. And what we have here is we have several people riding bicycles in a lane dedicated especially for them, and waiting at the crosswalk is a mother pushing her child in the stroller. The part of the sidewalk that the stroller is waiting on is called a curb cut. Those were actually originally developed in the 50s or 40s was the first occurrence of them for people who use wheelchairs to traverse sidewalks and streets more easily. But she's not in a wheelchair. The point here is that the Department of, the National Institute of Cancer has done a study on what it calls the curb cut effect. And that is, when you take into consideration people who need more help than others, you actually make it easier for everyone else. About 20-ish years ago, a group of inventors in France designed garden shears for senior citizens to do gardening. And the way they designed these shears, and I'm not a physicist, so I can't tell you if it was a first, second, or third class lever, but Matt could. They designed these shears so that their grandparents who don't have a lot of hand strength could easily snip thicker branches. The outcome of that is that those garden shears were actually the most popular on the market until competitors came about. Because people who had more hand strength realized how much easier it was to do their gardening, because the tool was created with people who have weak hand strength in mind, but it translated to make it easier for everyone else. You'll also notice the part of the curb cut where the stroller is sitting has these dotted bumps. That's there to allow blind people who use a cane to walk to feel when the texture of the street changes, and it gives them a cue, okay, I'm coming up to a street. But for this mother, it also acts as an additional safeguard to keep her stroller from moving if for some reason she removes her hands from the stroller. The lesson here is, if we design for the extremes, the middles can take care of themselves. So now what we have to talk about are some of the risks that you might face. And by risks, I do mean legal risks. Now, disclaimer, I am not a lawyer, I am not counsel. I deal on the technical and the visual side of things. The United States Justice Department has decided that the Americans with Disabilities Act does apply to websites. And when the DOJ is looking at a site which could be in violation, it looks at technical standards called the Web Content Accessibility Group. The Web Content Accessibility Group is staffed by people from Apple, Microsoft, Google, and these large tech companies. They get together and they discuss standards about how websites and how their browsers are going to work across websites. Now, each of these companies is going to build in different features into their web browsers, but they're all operating from the same set of standards. In fact, one of the links you'll get in here is that in a particular case, the Department of Justice actually referred to the Web Content Accessibility Group as the technical arbiters of whether or not a site was built according to standards. Just told you about Domino's Pizza and how they settled out of trial, but what I remember offhand is that had Domino's Pizza considered accessibility a little earlier in their process for their website, which would have cost them roughly an extra 30 grand in total, they would not have lost to the plaintiff. Now, I'm sure Domino's Pizza didn't do a website for $10,000. I'm sure there was a lot more into this. So I understand that different companies have to think about their returns. But when you get to the scale of Domino's, I'm sure a lot of people want a slice of your action. I know, bad pun. But had they paid attention to the process a little bit earlier and kept it in mind throughout the development, this would not have been a problem. From 2018 to 2022, the number of accessibility lawsuits is actually increasing. Now, at the same time, there are a lot of predatory lawsuits where they're just looking for somebody, low-hanging fruit, to see if they could potentially bring something to court. And there are ways that they do that, using browser extensions, and if it fails, then they think, well, let's give this a shot. Again, I am not counsel, so speak to your own counsel. But according to this link here, which you will get, there's no clear formula on the amount of penalties that can be imposed upon companies in violation. Some cases, it's as low as $5,000. In other cases, it can be well into the 6, if not 7-figure settlements. By the way, it doesn't matter which state you're in, because you could be sued by someone in California, even if your business is in Idaho. It depends on a number of things. And while some lawyers have debated whether or not this can work, it depends on the judge and the judge's posture towards this. But there have been some members of Congress and lawyers who have said, well, since Congress can regulate interstate commerce, do websites count as interstate commerce? One of the things that I did not have time to put into this presentation is something I just learned this morning. There's actually something called the Air Carrier Access Act, which applies specifically to airline carriers. The Department of Transportation and Development has actually determined a list of customer workflows and tasks that are mandated to be accessible, or they are in violation of the ADA. These are things such as, can the person book a ticket? Can they change their ticket? Can they check on their flight itinerary? And some others. And the idea of customer workflows is going to come through later on. The industries which are affected by this, I know you are in e-commerce, you're at 77% of the accessibility lawsuits. Food service is at 8%, and everyone else is at 3% and smaller. What typically happens that triggers a lawsuit is some person will come to your website and they're unable to accomplish a task, such as placing an order, signing up for an account, changing their shopping cart. These are things known as tasks. And we'll talk about this a little further. Well, who is disabled? You'll be surprised. According to the CDC, in Louisiana, 1 in 3 people has a disability. Many of these disabilities are mobility related, meaning they can't move or they have some trouble using their hands or some other muscular related challenges. They also have cognitive challenges. This could be something like my grandmother trying to use a website. She faces a cognitive challenge. And speaking of grandmothers, I have to tell you a story. My grandmother passed away last year. She was 96. And several years ago, when she moved into assisted living, she wanted a smartphone. And she wanted a smartphone because she heard that I and the other cousins were sending each other cat pictures. My grandmother was a cat lover. So we bought her an Android because she wanted something cheap. She had trouble using it. And at first, being the admission, I'm an Apple fan, I thought, well, it's because Androids are terrible. We then got her an iPhone. Same trouble. Well, one day I watched her using it, and what I discovered was that it was not my grandmother's fault. And I'm not going to ever tell her something was her fault. But my grandmother, early in her career in the 40s, worked in medical records, and as such, she had to use what was called a typewriter. Those are these mechanical devices that you push on them, and they put letters on a piece of paper. Well, this is important because it brings into mind the concept of the mental model and the cognitive model. Here's what I mean by that. Her cognitive model, with how the keyboard on the phone worked, she remembers pressing on the keys, and she's always had long nails. So she would try to press the smartphone keys with her fingernail, but it didn't work. And I told her, well, Grandma, you've got to press it with your finger. Well, here's the phone screen. She would take her finger and try to press like she did with a typewriter. And in doing so, she'd hit 3 and 4 keys, and she'd end up with gibberish on her screen. She was frustrated. Grandma never really got the chance to enjoy the cat photos with the rest of us. According to the Centers for Disease Control, 1 in 4 Americans has a disability. That's a lot of people. That's 25% of potential customers that you could have. Well, do you want to defend yourselves against people who are trying to buy something from you but can't? Or would you rather do business with them? According to the American Institute for Research, Americans with a disability have nearly $500 billion worth of buying power. That to me sounds like a pretty big market share. Now, some of you may say, well, what I've got would never be used by this group of people. There's a lady on the internet, Molly, I want to say Molly White, but that may not be her last name. Molly is blind, but Molly goes skiing. And the way she goes skiing is that her friends or loved ones will go on the slopes with her. Sometimes on some slopes they'll stand behind her and they'll guide her. Other times they'll stand in front of her and she'll put her hands out and then she'll let them steer. But at other times, if the slope gradient is low enough, her loved ones will stand on either side of her and allow her to ski without anyone holding her. That kind of broke some of the assumptions that I had about blind people. I also learned this. A few months ago, I was speaking to the Director of Educational Technology at the Louisiana School for the Deaf and Visually Impaired People. And he said that the smartphone has opened up the lives of blind and deaf people, among others, because for one thing, they can order an Uber so they can get around. They can order food and have it delivered to their house. And on top of that, because they can use a screen reader on their phone, much more of the internet has opened up to them. So, accessibility, which is a subset of usability, is good for you and it's good for all of us. Who am I? Well, I'm Israel Duke, and I know Warren has already introduced me. I didn't know you'd introduce me that soon, so we'll go ahead and skip this part here. But now I'm going to show you something. I'm going to show you a screen reader and how a screen reader uses a website. Now, before I start this, I'm using a Mac. Screen readers exist for Windows. If you have an iPhone, you actually have the screen reader built into your iPhone. That's important because 72% of the screen reader users in the United States use iPhones. Whereas screen reader software used to be really expensive software, now for the price of a phone, they get a screen reader and they get a connection to the world. So, I'm going to move forward here. Okay. For the sake of this, I created a simple product page. Now, it may not have all the bells and whistles of your site's product page, but there's enough here to introduce you to some of the concepts. But before we begin the screen reader, I need to tell you something. Screen readers have to announce everything on a page. They have to tell the person, hey, this is a button, you've never pressed it. Hey, here's a link, you've never been here yet. Here's a link, you've been to this link. Here's an image. Let me describe the image to you. Oh, here is a password field. I can't show you what it says. Or here's where you put your first name. So the screen reader is what we call verbose, which means it talks a lot. And here's why that's important. If I tell you, hey, go to this page and tell me what the reviews are, you'll probably come to this page and scroll down and say, there's the reviews. Looks like most people like this. It took me, 2 seconds to get there? It's not the same thing for a blind person or a person who uses screen readers. By the way, there are other people who are not legally blind, but they use screen readers because they can have the screen read to them while they do something else. Or for certain cognitive disabilities, they can have the site read to them because maybe they have trouble physically reading, especially in the cases of extreme dyslexia. Okay. Before I go any further, any questions before I move on? All right. So I'm going to start the screen reader, and as soon as I start it, it's going to start talking a lot.
Voiceover on Safari. Soap sample pack at the Everyone Store. Window. Soap sample pack at the Everyone Store. Web content has keyboard focus. You are currently on a banner inside of web content.
Imagine if you had to listen to that for every single thing you wanted to do. Well, they don't have to. There are certain shortcuts that they can use to jump around the page. And I'm going to show you one here.
Headings menu.
Headings are something we're going to talk about. Headings give the screen reader user a topical map of what's on the page so they can skip the stuff they're not interested in and go directly to the parts they are interested in, such as the reviews. Let's go down to the reviews. Oops. Sorry about that.
Heading level 2. Reviews.
I'm going to press the return key.
Heading level 2. Reviews. You are currently on a heading level 2.
It tells the person, we've gotten to the review section and I'm sitting on the header for this section waiting for you to tell me what to do next. What I'm going to do for the sake of giving you a little more taste of this is I'm going to instruct the screen reader to start reading from what you see here and go further on.
Heading level 2. Reviews. Average rating is 4 out of 5 stars in 241 reviews. List reviews 6 items. Karen rates this product 1 out of 5 stars. This soap smells awful. I want to talk to the manager. John rates this product 5 out of 5 stars. My wife loved it. Deb rates this product 4 out of 5 stars. I wish that they would show they locally source their ingredients.
All right, I'm going to pause it. If you pay attention here, let me grab my laser pointer. Okay, it's not showing up. Under reviews, we've got 5 stars, and it shows 5 stars in 241 reviews. But remember, it said average rating is 4 out of 5 stars. But that's not up there. The average rating text is what we call hidden text, placed there because the screen reader can't read icons. So I put things under there to give the screen reader user context about what they're hearing, whereas for all of us, we can look at this and go, oh, 4 out of 5 stars. They need auditory cues for the things that we consider visual cues. I'm going to pull up a list of links now. How many of you have gone to a website and you've seen things such as click here or read more? Those links do not provide value or any information to people who use screen readers. Let me show you why.
Headings menu.
I'm going to go to the list of links.
Buttons menu. Images lists menu. Non-visited links menu. Windows visited non-visited links menu. Visited links menu.
Okay. I'm going to scroll through this list of a couple of them.
Visited link image. The Everyone Store logo. Current page. Visited link. Health and beauty. Clickable. Current page. I wish that they would show they locally source their.
Okay. As I went down the list of links, it read where the link takes the person. If a screen reader user pulls up this list and all they hear is click here, read more, it doesn't tell them where they're going. And they're not going to go clicking around to find out. They're going to look for the clearest explanation of what happens. Now, there are design and technical solutions to get around that sort of thing, but it's part of what we have to consider when we think about how the site is presented to people who can't see. I'm going to show you a couple of other things. And then,
Voiceover off.
Oops, I didn't mean to turn it off. Trying to move that out of the way. Okay, I would like a volunteer. Warren, why don't you come up? Because you put this whole thing together. Let me make sure I've got this set up right. So I just showed you a quick sample of how a screen reader presents the page to its user. So Warren, what I'm going to ask you to do is, you see the tab key on my keyboard?
Yep.
Each time I ask you to press it, just press it one time. And as Warren presses it, I want you to watch what happens on the screen. All right, would you press the tab key the first time? Press it again. Okay. If you notice, in the upper left corner, a link came up that says skip to main content. There's a reason for that. Warren, would you press the tab key again? Okay, Rob, what just happened? How do you know it went to the logo? Right, what tells you that it went to the logo? That's called a focus indicator. And we'll come back to this in a second. Warren, do you mind pressing it again? All right, press it again, and one more time. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press, I'll make sure it's the space bar. Oops, nope, not the space bar. Okay, Warren, would you hit the return key on my keyboard? Warren just pressed the return key, and the return key on my keyboard opened up this drop down, which will take you to the profile or the payment methods page. Warren, you can go and have a seat. Thank you. The reason I wanted Warren to do this, because I wanted you to see this was not me just pulling off something that you couldn't see. Using the keyboard to go through a website is a fundamental and one of the first checks that accessibility professionals use as a litmus test for the code quality of your sites and the adherence of your site to standards. Now that I've shown you that, I'm going to tab through myself a couple of times to bring it to something. Rob, you want to be my volunteer now, or you want to finish eating? Okay. All right, well, I won't make anyone get up. But as you notice, right now, my keyboard focus indicator is on the select drop-down. When I press it again, I'm going to go to add to cart. When I press return, I have a pop-up window which tells me, hey, I've added this to the cart. And we can see this, so we know, hey, I just added this to the cart, and the website is now responding to me. I wanted to show you the visual of these things because now I'm going to do the exact same things, but this time using the screen reader. You'll still be able to see it as the audience, but what's important is that you listen for how the screen reader indicates to the user that these things have occurred. So I'm going to turn the screen reader on again.
Voiceover on.
And I'm going to pause it because we've already heard that part. So now I'm going to use the screen reader's keyboard commands to go to those things.
Save for add to cart button.
So I'm on
You
the
are
add to
currently
cart
on a button. To click this button, press Control Option Space.
All right, I'm pressing Control Option Space.
Added to main. Added to cart. Web dialog. You are currently on a web dialog.
Did you hear a tiny water droplet sound? I'll play that again.
Added to cart. Add to cart. Button main. You are current.
All right, I'm going to press it again. Listen carefully.
Added to main. Added to cart. Web dialog.
Did you
You
hear
are
that?
currently on a web dialog.
Okay. That tiny sound is the auditory cue built in to tell the person, hey, something just popped up. You'll also notice it said web dialog. That's another second cue to tell the person who needs a screen reader, hey, a pop-up window has just shown up. This gives them information about how the state of the website or the condition that the website is in has changed. And here's why I wanted to show you this. There are lots of pop-ups on sites, and there's different kinds of pop-ups. But if you have any pop-ups on your site, they need to do what this screen reader just did. If they don't, you have an accessibility problem. So now, I'm going to use the tab key, and you'll notice, as Rob pointed out, he can see the dashed line. Every time
Added to
I
cart. Web
press the
dialog.
tab
With
key,
6 items closed.
it's going to stay inside of the pop-up.
Visited. Link. Check out now. Keep shopping. Close. Button. Visited. Keep shop. Close. Visited. Keep shopping.
All right, I won't keep doing that. but it stays, the keyboard's attention, also known as focus, stays inside of this pop-up window. That is also something that your pop-up windows need to do, and here's why. Because if they don't, that means that they could be tabbing through other parts of their site, but because this window is saying, no, I'm open, you have to deal with me first, that now means that they actually can't use your site because something is blocking their use of it. And if that is happening on your site, you have an accessibility problem. So you've seen this pop-up. I'm going to show you 2 more pop-ups, and then I'm going to turn off the screen reader.
Edit Add to Cart. Button main. You are currently on a button.
Okay. Your right of the Add to Cart button is a save for later. Listen to what happens and watch what happens when I press that. I'm going to move this thing first. Oops.
Save for later. Button. You are saved for later. Close.
Did you see
Button.
what happened there?
You are currently
Did you
on a
hear
button.
the
To
tiny
click this
chime
button,
which occurred?
press Control, Option
Okay,
Space.
That's a different set of cues for the screen reader user telling them, this is an alert, but you don't need to worry about it. I'll just tell you right now and get out of your way. So if you're using that sort of pop-up in your website, it needs to behave the same way as that one. And I think my microphone just cut off. All right.
Bars.
All right. So
You
I've
are
shown you
currently
that.
on
I'm
a
gonna show
window.
you one more pop-up, and then I'm going to turn off the screen reader. So, like a screen reader user, I'm going to come to the footer. And I think that sound is not coming through.
Actions available. You are currently at 56%.
43%.
Okay.
Safari. Sold sample packet to everyone store. Windows spots. Links menu. Landmarks. Form. Landmarks menu. Form control. Headings menu. You are heading level 3. Get our newsletter.
I'm going to go to Get Our Newsletter, because that's the thing which allows the person to sign up for your newsletter.
Heading level 3. Get our newsletter. You are currently on the heading level 3. Get a monthly digest of what's new. Email address. Email address. Get. Button.
Now I'm going to
You are
press,
currently on a button. To click this button, heading level 2. You're subscribed. Web dialog. You are currently on a head.
okay. I just walked through the subscription process again. This is not a real website. But when this pop-up occurred, once again, even though it looks different and behaves different, it still told the user, hey, I'm a web dialog, I'm a pop-up, you have to deal with me before you can deal with anything else on the page. I've done this to you 3 times because I want to drive home the point that this kind of thing is actually one of the biggest obstacles to people who have to use a screen reader when they're trying to use a website, where a pop-up occurs and it won't let them do anything else.
Close. Get. Voiceover off.
I'm going to stop that now, and we're going to go back to the presentation. So now that I've shown you that, hopefully it's giving you a small taste of what life is like for someone who has to use a screen reader. And here's why this is important. I asked Warren to come up and tab through the site. One thing that has to happen with a website for it to be compliant with accessibility, technical, and legal standards is the entire website must be usable with just a keyboard. And I'll show you more information about this. Now, here's the 10 things that you can do. Now, the first 5 things you can probably do yourself, but the second set of 5 things you probably want your developer to help you with. But these are things, as I've said, that you can do as a litmus test of your own site. And I'll tell you what to look for. Question 1. Can you use your website using only a keyboard? If you look at the guy in this photograph, he has some sort of cerebral palsy. He cannot physically impossible for him to use a mouse. But you'll notice he's got this sort of big joystick, because he can still take his arm and tap the joystick. So he can still tab through the site, and if he taps this thing differently, it's like pressing the enter key. Or if he hits it a different way, it's like hitting a checkbox. Or if he hits it a different way, it's like going to a link. He could still, so if your site is usable using only the keyboard, he can still buy things from you. So here's what you can do. Step 1, go through your entire website with just a keyboard. Bring your mouse over to your neighbor's house or something. Make it hard for yourself. Use your tab key because it navigates around the interactive elements on your site. And as you saw when Rob pointed out, every time we pressed tab, there was a strong visual indicator of where the keyboard was paying attention. It's called the focus indicator in technical terms. Number 2, do all the things that you need to do on your website, such as set up an account, change your order, update your address, your payment info, and I mean everything. As I mentioned earlier, the Department of Transportation has the Air Carrier Access Act with a number of user flows or user tasks that they've mandated to be accessible. 3, make sure everything on your site is keyboard operable. Set up some key tasks that you think that everyone will need to do, and invite other people who don't work for you. Maybe a business colleague who works someone else, and ask them, what do you need to do on my site? And here's why that's important. Remember earlier I talked about my grandmother's mental model? You guys have built your business. I'm sorry, you people, everyone here, I'm trying to be inclusive and saying you guys, you people. Everyone here has built your business. So you know how your business works. But how many of your customers come to you and they automatically know everything about how it works? Your return policies, your payment policies, that sort of thing. They may not. What they understand about your website is called the mental model. What you know about your business is called the cognitive model. So get other people's input about what they think they need to do on your site. And as Rob showed us, make sure you can tell where the keyboard is paying attention, because there's a strong focus indicator. Number 2, are the headings obvious to people and screen readers? Now, to sighted users, headers are usually the big, bold text. But just because text is big and bold does not mean that it's been coded as a header. Now, you can ask your developer about this, but when there's a header, the screen reader user can pull up a topical map on the page and go straight to what they're looking for. But how is that helpful? Well, it's not my grandfather, but this is someone else's grandfather. And he's using the keyboard, but he's got glasses. His eyesight's probably weaker than ours. But the headers, the big, bold text, as he's scrolling through the page, it tells him what he's looking at as he scrolls. And guess what? Usability studies have shown people don't read websites anymore. They scan and scroll just looking for the part they're looking for. So if you have headers on your site that are real headers in cold and look visually like headers, you're helping everyone. So what do? Go through your website, designate representative pages, because if you have an e-commerce site, your product page is a templated page. And number 2, there's a Chrome plugin I've linked here called the Headings Map. Follow its instructions, it'll tell you all of the headings. So all you have to do is look at its list of headings. You should only have one, heading level 1, but you can have as many heading level 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s as necessary, but they have to follow each other in logical sequential order. So you can't go from H1 to H3, to go from H1 to 2 to 3 to 4, etc. And I've just told you about 3 and 4, so let's go to number 3. Do your links and buttons make sense out of context? We talked about the click here and the read more. My advice, omit click here and read more. Make your links more descriptive. Make your links and your buttons more descriptive of what they do. And there's a difference between a link and a button. Your developers should be able to explain the difference to you, but in general, a link changes where you are, but a button makes the page do something. So what do? Go through your website and look for those ambiguous links and buttons. Then rewrite the text so that the link or button is more descriptive about where it takes you or what it does. Also, if you have an image that you're using as a link, and we'll cover alternative text in just a moment here, the alternative text of the image actually becomes the link text read out to the person. Number 4 is a little more that I can go into one session, but I'll give you the broad overview. Are your forms accessible? You know what your forms are. Because when people sign up or put in their payment info. On each and every form field, click the label that's above the form field. When you click the label, your form field should light up with with the focus indicator. And why is this important? Because it means your label and your form field are connected in code. It also gives people a bigger area to touch to start filling in the form field. So if someone can't use a mouse, it's easier for them to fill out that information. And number 2, and I cannot stress this one enough, I've seen lots of violations of this. Don't remove form labels. I've seen people remove the form labels because they think, well, this will be understood. Actually, it prevents 1 in 4 people from using your site because their software can't tell them what they're supposed to be putting in here. The third thing is use real HTML form fields. I've seen companies create their own drop-downs, for example, because they don't like the way the default one looks. Well, if you're going to create your own, you have to put the same amount of work in that custom HTML form field as Apple, Microsoft, and Google put into their browsers, because the native controls know how to talk to the operating system already, which is what talks to the screen reader. So if you're building a custom control, your custom control has to talk to the operating system and the screen reader, and that's a lot more work. Number 4, if your site is creating some sort of a legal obligation, you have to give the user some sort of a grace period in which they can reverse their submission, or you give them several chances to confirm that they really want to submit this form to you. All right, this is the last one that you can do yourself. Do your images have alternative text? Alternative text is a description of the image in code which tells the screen reader, or if someone can't see the images because their network is slow, it's a description of the images. For this image, it might be man holding smartphone close to his ear. Because if I can't see this image, maybe my company, his image is blocked. Maybe my network connection is slow and the images haven't loaded yet. I would still see a description, man holding phone next to his ear. But people who use a screen reader will hear image of a man holding phone next to his ear. And it gives them some context of what's on this page. So what you do, install a Chrome extension called the Alt Text Viewer, and when you press it, it'll show you all of the image's alternative texts. Now, some images don't need it. If you have an image that's decorative and really isn't important to understanding the page, it still has to have alt text, but the alt text can be blank. And there's a slight difference there. And then if you have to rewrite the alt text using these guidelines from Microsoft, they're applicable to Word, but they actually do apply to the web as well. All right, so the next 5 things, and we're coming close to the end here. These are things that you probably need your developers' help with. Why is your website so slow? How many of you have used your e-commerce site in a coffee shop or in a place where there's a weak signal? I advise you, go to coffee shops, which typically have terrible Wi-Fi. Go to a place where the signal is weak and pull up your site and see how long your site takes to load. Google's research has shown that for every 1 second it takes for your website to load fully or within usable time, because sometimes your site can still be loading but you can still click around, for every 1 second that the person can't click around, you've lost potentially 20% of your conversions. So here's the 4 things, and I don't know why that text is blue, it shouldn't be like that, sorry. Here's the 4 things you do. Go to coffee shops, go to places where there's weak signal. Use a phone, use an older computer, use a tablet, use an older phone. See how long your website takes to load for it to be fully usable. And then number 2, your developers will love you for this. Ask them what features they would remove if they had their way, and then test your website with those features removed and consider the long-term return that you're getting for all of those things. And these may be, so you've got several marketing tracking strips. Maybe you've got HubSpot analytics in addition to Google Analytics. Well, the more of these things that have to load behind the scenes, the longer it takes. And if you do business internationally, the rate of use of smartphones among people is much higher than it is here in the United States, because people aren't buying as many laptops or desktops anymore. Phones are everywhere in the world. Computers are mostly clustered around the West and developing nations. And the rate of smartphone as the only device that someone has is actually growing. And in some markets, even emerging markets, they may have 2 or 3 smartphones. So think about the return you get from those features and consider that the world is moving to smartphones. And even in the West, the reason, COVID put a kink in this, but the reason laptop and desktop purchase is down is because when most people go home, computer represents work, whereas phone represents, this is mine, I'm home now. Number 7, do you really need that pop-up? Now, somebody's going to throw food at me with some of the things I'm about to say. I showed you earlier how the pop-up needs to behave and announce itself to the screen reader. I've read reports from some companies that when they did studies on the email addresses they got, a lot of them were bogus emails or emails that didn't convert because people were just putting in a fake email address to get it out of the way. Now, this does not carry across to every company, but I strongly suggest you do research on your own, because if the pop-up is occurring and it's not converting and it doesn't behave like the pop-ups I showed you earlier, you're going to have an accessibility problem. So, what can you do? I would suggest that you get your developers to learn how to use a screen reader, and I'll talk more about that. Ensure that your pop-ups announce themselves to the screen reader, just like I showed you. Now, different screen readers will do it in a different way, but whoever uses that screen reader knows how their screen reader is announcing things to them. And then when the pop-up first appears, Rob, the focus indicator, the first place the keyboard needs to be paying attention to is the close button. There's a reason for that. Because if someone gets in a flow, but your pop-up just automatically pops up without them doing anything, that's jarring and confusing. Their first reaction is escape key. That makes it close. But if it doesn't close, you have an accessibility problem. And then make sure all of your pop-ups are operable by the keyboard, and if at all possible, avoid scrolling content inside of a pop-up. That's for several reasons. Not only does it hurt people who need a screen reader or disabled people, but for people who are more or less able-bodied on a phone, oftentimes there's difficulty scrolling a scrolling area inside of a touch screen which already tries to scroll. So Google Maps says, no, use 2 fingers. Or another open source map will say, use 3 fingers. So now they have to relearn how to use their own screen. Avoid scrolling content inside of a pop-up. And for test that your emails are actually converting and that you're actually getting value for this. This one, I personally get hit with this one a lot, and it makes me angry. But if it's hard to unsubscribe from your emails, you're actually breaking the law. When you send an email to a customer or a lead or a prospect, you must identify your message as an ad, and there are actually Federal Trade Commission laws about this. And when I give you this presentation, you'll get these links. And 2, you have to tell people how to remove themselves from your list, and you have to honor opt-out requests as soon as you can. In fact, Federal Trade Commission says they look for within 24 hours. But Number 4, you got to watch your vendors, because if someone else is managing this for you and they don't do it, according to the DOJ, you cannot contract away liability. So if your site is doing it, but you're paying someone else to manage it, you're actually still liable. Number 9, are your buttons and links easy to detect and press? Back in the old days of the internet, links had underlines under them. In designers, I myself did it at one point in my career. We removed them because we just didn't like how they look. Well, if you're colorblind, and 10% of males are colorblind, that means if your link doesn't have an underline, well, let me specify, a link inside of a sentence. If it doesn't have an underline, but maybe you've just slightly changed the color, some people can't detect that, which means they won't know that that's a link, which means they'll never click on it, which means you're losing functionality in your site. So, if your links and buttons are both big enough and easy enough to press, you won't have an accessibility problem. And by big enough and easy enough, MIT's user research laboratory recently did research that showed that most fingers or most links and buttons can accommodate fingers for easy pressing if the link in its smallest dimension is at least 1 centimeter. That means roughly 44 pixels on a screen. Now, if it's a link in text, the longer the link, they have more space to press it. And as you can see from the photograph here, this gentleman is using what's called a sip and puff device. When he sips, it does one kind of click. When he puffs by blowing out, it does another kind of click. How many of you remember Christopher Reeves as Superman? He had to use one of these devices. So what can you do? Take a walk. Use your website with just one hand on your phone. Put your other hand behind your back. Or use your website with your non-dominant hand while holding something in your dominant hand. Make sure that it's still easy enough for you to click. If you're having trouble with it, I promise you, your customers or your visitors are going to have trouble with it. Use it one-handed. Use it while you're pushing a stroller and while you call your friend to talk. One hand on the stroller, the other hand on the phone. You know, you're trying to talk and do this. Use your site while holding a child or groceries in your dominant arm. Or, if you're in public, and don't be a creep about this, watch how other people use their phone. Research I've read show that there are 1,300 possible combinations of how people hold their phones. Some are people holding, let me grab mine, they're holding the phone with both hands and using thumbs. Some people are holding the phone in the middle and just using their index finger and they're carefully tapping around. Some people may be holding it at the bottom and using the thumb from whatever their dominant hand is. 1,300 combinations. And depending on where your button or link is, may need to be even larger than the 44 pixels. If it's on the edges, it needs to be larger because touches are less accurate on the edges. So if you're putting things on your side like a toolbar and they're small, those are going to be hard to touch. And most people are going to say, I'm not dealing with that, and they won't touch it. Whereas if it's in the middle of your screen, usually it doesn't have to be as large as everything else. But the guideline there is 1 centimeter in the smallest dimension, or roughly 44 pixels. Finally, number 10. Does your site have video or audio? Lots of sites do, and here's what you have to do. And this gentleman, by the way, is the director of assistive technology at Washington State University. And if you have videos or audio in your site, you have to include captions and transcripts. Now, you get benefit from doing this. Captions are the things that show in the video as you're watching it. Well, guess what? Gen Z loves captions because Gen Z is starting to use their phones in public places, but they've got the volume turned down. They're still watching the video and reading the captions. Or imagine you're in a crowded, busy, loud place. You can still read the captions, even though the video is playing. But if you're blind, you can't see the captions. But if you have a transcript, they can now read the transcript, and if you have a transcript, that means Google can now index the content of your video and make it available to a wider group of people. I mean, we all want Google finding our site and pushing stuff up. So, create captions or transcripts for the video. It's better if you have both, and put it near the audio or video. And whatever controls you have for playing the audio and the video, those controls too have to be keyboard operable. And if you don't have transcripts but only captions, try your best to get the transcripts, or make the content of the video available in some textual format some way. And then finally, if you have a video that's narrated but there's things happening in the background like here, you may have to get what's called an audio description. And what an audio description is, maybe it's showing the video of this room and it's got me talking, but then there's a lower voice in the video saying, the speaker is waving his arms. People are watching him like he's a genius. Because it tells the person who uses those what's happening in the room, even though they can only hear what's being said in the video. And I don't know why this is not going forward, so I apologize. Okay. Try that one more time. I apologize. It's because it's the end. Okay, so any questions? Because that's everything.
I got a question. At the end, you were speaking about how the transcript adds to the content for SEO and Google. All the other stuff we talked about previously, does that, all those other things, does that also aid in SEO as you're doing those things as well?
Yes, especially the image descriptions and the headings. And the reason is, if you think there are certain kinds of search engine result listings that when you click them, they'll bring you to a specific place on a page without making you scroll through it, that's because Google can index the actual headings as well as the content, so it can bring that visitor to the exact spot on your page where it exists.
Can you talk about these third-party apps and Shopify as a number of apps that are supposed to be compliant? You install the app that takes care of everything. And I know WordPress is the other published. There's again these plugin apps. Can you just talk a little bit about it? Because I know some of the business people that I know that installed it on their site and it's going to solve the issue.
Okay, I think what you're talking about is something called an accessibility overlay, and that is usually there's this bubble that appears when you press it, this thing pops up. Well, as it turns out, most of the companies who have gotten sued have those installed on their sites. That thing, it's window dressing. It doesn't actually change the code of the site. It puts things on top with duct tape, which makes it look good for us, but it's not actually changing the underlying code of the site, which is where the problems are located. In fact, one of those overlay vendors actually has in their terms of service that they will only help represent you in court if your site is built with standards compliant code. But the problem is, for them, if you have standards compliant code, you don't need that overlay. So you're paying, what, $45 a month, if not more, for something that you're getting nothing back for. Now, that's an accessibility overlay vendor, and there are multiple companies that do that, but there is, and since you're asking, I didn't think to put that in here, there's a website called Overlay Fact Sheet, which is actually signed by people who work for Microsoft, Google, etc., trying to tell the industry, these things do not work. Don't put them on your site. The National Federation for the Blind has actually banned these overlay vendors from ever coming to their conferences because they don't work. And in fact, in some cases, they actually make it harder for people with disabilities because these overlays keep trying to get in the way as you're using it, but they've already got a piece of middleman software. So the overlay vendor software and their software end up in conflict. And how do you resolve that?
Yeah, sorry for walking in late, but maybe you covered this already, but what are the typical fines? Like if I'm gonna do, a cost benefit analysis, versus being sued or doing the update, what's the
So actually, one of the slides that was in here was earlier on. There's no clear formula. There was a tattoo shop that was, and this is going to sound weird, successfully sued by the plaintiff. Tattoo shops are usually very small businesses, but they're considered open to the public and thus public access. I list Domino's Pizza, who had a settlement. It's rumored to be $350,000. It would have cost them an extra $35,000 during the lifetime of producing the website for them to simply put all these parts into play. And one of the other things I talked about is it doesn't matter which state you're in, because someone who is in California who can't use your site in Louisiana may be able to successfully sue you, depending on the judge's posture to this sort of thing. But one of the things I do have in the presentation is that the Department of Justice last year issued an opinion saying that it considers websites as covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. And what this means is your website does need to be compliant.
We got it last year.
No one did?
Yeah.
Yes.
Haskell did, yeah.
You wanna disclose the cost or just, you don't have to?
I don't know, actually, I don't know what the end result was of that, as far as money. But yeah, so, and then we put exactly what, as we're saying, to not put it on your website, which is like the Shopify add-on app, that we have for accessibility. But, it's a great, I'm glad you covered this topic, we wanted to look at that,
You can go to-
Yeah, it was a predatory lawyer, I mean.
Yeah, there are a lot.
Suing everybody.
Yeah.
We looked him up, I mean, he had.
They're doing it for themselves, not to make them.
And a million lawsuits out there for everything you could imagine for.
So would you say that in that case, doing anything is worth it? Because,
Well,
or did you do it after you got sued?
well, we did it afterwards, but, I'll have to rethink our whole strategy here now after hearing this, which is, again, good information. But I thought at least at that point, if you gotta go to court, you could at least say, have some leg to stand on, like, hey, Judge, we do have, this accessibility button. Not understanding the full depth of everything, because what was covered very eloquently by the way, good job.
Thank you.
But, so, yeah, we added this app, and I don't know, I never really believed that it was the cure-all, but I thought, okay, at least it's one flimsy line of defense at least. It's better than having nothing and being completely exposed. Because we have nothing on your site, and you'll just get served, At least with this, we can say, hey, you're on effort. Yeah,
Since
we're not a technical IT company, we're a clothing company.
Since you bring this up, I didn't put this in here because I wasn't. There's something you can ask your vendors for. So if you're getting a third party to build things for you, software company or something, you can ask for what's called, and talk to your lawyers about this. Again, I'm not counsel, I'm a designer. I can do some code, but I'm not counsel. It's called a Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, or VPAT for short. And that is where your vendor provides to you a kind of attestation that says, this thing we've tested. We're fully compliant or we're partially compliant, as long as with the roadmap that they're using to get to full compliance for all the features in the software that they're asking for. And it's more of a legal document than a technical document. A VPAT, Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, then turns into, and these are lawyers getting together, turns into something called an ACR, Accessibility Compliance Report, which then lists with some sort of a letter grade or numeric grades of the overall accessibility of your site. Now, something I do want to warn you is that every time Apple comes out with a new phone or a new operating system, the way this stuff works changes. So if you did something last year and it came out perfect, you still need to check this every so often. To use a similar metaphor from another industry, do you think the chemical processing plants across the river, that they have the OSHA guy come just once a year? Or do you think they have this person come every so often to check their ongoing compliance? It's really the same thing here. Again, if your developers and your designers are using standards compliant code and they're thinking about this during the process, you'll be in a pretty good position. Now, you still may have some smaller issues, but you came in late. The lawsuits are basically summed up as this. Some person came to your website and was not able to do something, such as sign up for an account, change the order card, or update payment methods, or update their contact information. So what you want to do is you want to come up with everything that people need to do when they come to your site, and make sure that everything, and I mean everything, is keyboard operable. Because if everything is keyboard operable, you're in a pretty good position. And that's because, I mentioned this earlier, keyboard operability is the first litmus test. Like at the state, that's one of the first things I start. Can I use the site with a keyboard? If it is, we're in a pretty good spot. It doesn't mean that everything's perfect, but we're thinking, okay, they can do everything with a keyboard. That means it's usable, which means there are no barriers to access.
So has anybody here done all of this already, like, is anybody's site 100%?
We got the overlay, we got the band, and the duct tape.
Yeah.
This is my guy, thank goodness it was here.
We're in the process of designing a new website, so it's something we're thinking about. I think your analogy to OSHA is the way I'm interpreting it and I'm thinking about it. We have someone in the warehouse, we have an OSHA guy come over once every, whatever the time period, we would an audit of us. Now, does that stop us from having OSHA risks? No. Someone might fall off a ladder, gets crushed by a little walk behind forklift. We're gonna have an OSHA problem, right? We're gonna have an audit. They're gonna find compliance issues. But if I have a track record of having audits done, and if I have the basics done, you know, I have stuff piled up in front of my breaker box, and I have all my MSDS, if I'm trying to do all the stuff that is a total waste of time, no one's ever gonna go over my MSDS.
Rare.
But at least I've shown good effort, right? But if I have an incident, and then I have nothing, well then I'm more liable. And so I'm thinking about this the same way, like, okay, I'm never gonna, sure, you know, I didn't know I had lots of conversations about this, like, I don't necessarily think that a lot of people that can't see or are blind are gonna buy auto parts, like, I just don't see it. But, right, I mean, maybe possibly.
Let me challenge you on that.
No, I know. but still, like, maybe they're buying it. But,
For the lawyer, too,
but for the lawyer,
Yeah, no.
I wanna be able to show best effort. I wanna say I did like 99% of it, so okay, sue me.
Yeah, but the predatory lawyer looks for this stuff, and then he gets the concerned disabled citizen Joe.
But I don't wanna be
He's
the
listening.
easy part.
But what I'm saying is, you know, we got sued for Prop 65, okay, for coconut bark, because there's sawdust in it. Okay, so there's a predatory lawyer who found Joe Q. Public to sue on his behalf, so Joe's not doing any work, he's getting a couple $1,000s from a lawyer, and then the lawyer charges like $900 an hour to sue. So what I'm saying is, you're probably not gonna be turned in by anybody who's trying to own the site. The person's gonna turn you in as a lawyer looking to make bank on it. That's what happened for us on Prop 65.
But think about it from a lawyer's point of view. I've got a skimmer, and I go across the entire web, and I'm looking for the sites that are big, and I'm looking for the sites that aren't compliant, and are grossly uncompliant.
That's why we hoped with the overlay, maybe that would, it was more almost to deter the lawyers, you know, is more than anything, you know, like, okay, if I'm looking at your 4 sites, you have something on yours, you 3 have nothing, well, I'll leave him alone, and I'm coming after you.
Stay on it.
At least it's a shield made of
Sure.
tissue paper maybe, but still, it's better than that.
Let me make,
It was a really good exercise for our design team too, because we started looking, Bill and I started looking at the whole site, we took a step back and we actually put a new Shopify, theme on it, we
Yeah.
changed up the menu, we adjusted it, we tested it on a couple of different devices, so it kind of took us down a redesign of the website and a redesign of our flow for things that we didn't even know were an issue. We haven't gone down the keyboard trail yet, I'm gonna leave that to our IT department, but,
let me
yeah, that's
suggest,
It's definitely from a designer's perspective, it's made me aware of things that I wasn't aware of before, just having done the research and read through what the ADA, they slid it in during COVID, so like we got blindsided after COVID with it, because it was some laws that they put in place that we weren't even aware of.
let me suggest that you get a third party to look at it as well. If your development firm is on a fixed cost and they have to do extra work, they may just say it's okay. Some of the larger companies will get a third-party accounting firm to audit and make sure things are okay. It's really kind of the same thing. I suggest you get a third party to look at it and then come back with their findings.
Do you do that, or do you know anyone that does that you could recommend?
There are bigger companies that do this. So, I mean, if you reach out to me on LinkedIn or something, I can give you some links. I myself cannot do that because I am an employee of the state, and so there's all these conflicts of interest. I'm doing this because I'm building a career and I'm getting to practice my public speaking.
So I want to switch gears. I see it's exciting to talk about the liability and stuff, but you talked about how doing this actually helps everyday user do the better on the site. Are you aware of any studies to show that when you implement these in your site, that you're getting an increased conversion rate of what the A/B test on what that looks like, so you can really see what the ROI can be from just doing these things?
Yes, especially in the case of the headings, which is the big text that's bold, but it's also marked as a heading in code. When users are giving tasks in research, so companies will hire users to test and say, hey, go and make an account, and they'll record their screens and they'll watch them. They can finish some of these tasks in less time, which means they're not spending time on your site doing the things they don't want to do. So they can finish tasks more quickly, or if the buttons and the links are big enough, they can press buttons or links and not have to use the back button as many times because they were too close together or too small, or in the case when it just says click here, they can actually see where they're going, which means that they click where they wanted to click. I've heard people say, oh, make as few clicks as possible. Not necessarily the case. You want as few unnecessary clicks as possible, because sometimes you want the user to go through it as quickly as possible. Sometimes, if you need to ensure a process, you want them to click maybe more times because they're clicking intentionally, and this gives you data integrity as well.
You had mentioned, and maybe this is part of the ADA compliance thing, but do you really have to have somebody narrating in the background? The speaker just put his arm to the right. Is that part of the compliance, or is that just more of a suggestion?
It is part of the compliance. Now, certain kinds of videos, so one exception, now there are exceptions to things, but you have to be diligent about how you're describing the exception. So let's say you own a learning management system website, and you show them, let's say it's meant for pipeline workers, right? And so you're showing, because a pipeline worker, obviously you've got to be able to see what you do. In that case, if you're giving the pipeline worker a test where they're supposed to visually watch what's happening and then indicate it somehow, well, you could say, well, that description track gives them the answer, so then we can't successfully test them. But you've got to be prepared to show rock solid why you should get the exemption for that.
It's going to be a lot of overhead to now do a video.
That's a lot to contemplate, yeah, exactly, just trying to add some context to the
So
site.
you say that those AI services that generate that?
So there are AI services which will do that, but the AI is not yet perfect enough. But one thing that YouTube will do for you, if you upload a video to YouTube, YouTube has automatic captioning. Once it goes through, you can download its caption and get one of your developers or administrative people, probably not your developers, they cost too much per hour, get one of your other employees to go through the transcript and correct any spelling or wording changes. And then you can then re-add that caption track, and then now you've let the computer do most of the work for you, but you've still given it the personal attention. And if you document that somewhere, that could be something, as Matt said, this shows that I've done my best to be compliant.
If you're linking to the YouTube video, does that mean you would be compliant?
That I can't answer. I haven't seen anything where you can say, oh, we put our video on YouTube, it's their fault. Google can afford more lawyers than you can. So I don't want to tell you to rely extensively on YouTube for that, because they could change their policy at any moment. But
Is
yeah.
the ADA planning to do any everybody that it's kind of like engineering where you have to be ADA compliant with sidewalks and, you know, the size of your store and the walkways and the bathrooms, and you have to have somebody, you know, check to make sure that those, is there gonna be any kind of, anything like that coming down, or?
So the ADA actually hasn't come out and said you have to do X, Y, Z. Explicitly, what they have done is they've pointed to the WCAG WCAG standards and it said they're the technical standards. And the DOJ has said the same thing, they're the technical standard. In fact, there was, I want to say it's Louisiana Tech a few years ago was sued by a student because the student couldn't use the classroom assignment software. The student was successful in using it. The blind student had to use a screen reader. In that case, the DOJ pointed at the WCAG as, well, these are the standards. You're a vendor who, but because you can't contract away liability, should have followed.
We got kind of blindsided, you know, I guess as a business owner, it's incumbent on you to know the rules, but it's hard to know the rules of everything all the time. And
Yeah.
just to get certain papers over your website, it's like, what, you know, like, oh, it has to be this, it has to be that, it's like, I don't know, and this is kind of what we do, and I just never knew it was that important or required, I guess, you know, to the
And-
point of like being legal or illegal.
And so the website stuff I'm talking about, there's some overlap where if you're having a custom app built for iPhones and Androids, a lot of the same stuff applies, but those platforms have their own accessibility hooks built into them where if you read their documentation, you can use the accessibility stuff they've built into those platforms. But what it usually means is the project will take a little longer, yes, because you're doing all the work that's required. We think that it takes longer, but in reality what's happened is in the 90s, by the way, even in the 90s, these same standards existed. The barrier for becoming a web design shop or even a software shop is getting lower and lower. Well, to get the project out, they're cutting corners. And as a result, they're giving a false impression of what it really actually takes to build a digital product. And then when another shop comes along and says, well, we've got to do this stuff because this is accessible, the business owner, and you can't blame them, thinks, you're just trying to charge me more. Because they've already gotten the false positives of what a site or a product should cost.
I just want to add time. Thank you so much. This is very informative. We appreciate your time and your information.
Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, that's great, great job.
Well, this was, I guess this was the 88